Africa is full of wars, insurgencies, coups, and collapsing states. And somehow, British-made weapons keep showing up in the middle of it. Not always in huge headlines, not always in neat official announcements, but again and again across conflict zones, repression crackdowns, and fragile governments, British arms, British military technology, and British defense-linked exports keep appearing in the background. And that raises a brutal question. Why is Britain, a country that constantly talks about human rights, stability, and international law, so deeply tied to the weapons pouring into some of Africa's most dangerous crises? Because this is not just about guns. It is about power, influence, money, old imperial networks, and a modern arms trade that works very hard to stay invisible. Britain no longer rules African territory the way it once did, but in many ways, it still shapes African battlefields. And the method is no longer colonial occupation. Now it is licensing deals, training missions, defense partnerships, surveillance systems, armored vehicles, components, ammunition, rifles, aircraft support, crowd control gear, and military relationships built over decades. That is what makes this story so disturbing. Because when people think about arms flooding Africa, they often imagine Russia, China, maybe the United States. But Britain's role is quieter, more polished, less discussed. And that is exactly why it matters. Britain sits at the center of one of the most sophisticated arms export systems in the world. Its companies manufacture weapons, parts, electronics, targeting systems, vehicles, naval equipment, and security hardware that can travel across continents through direct sales, intermediaries, joint ventures, and third country transfers. So even when a rifle or vehicle is not stamped with a giant Union Jack, British industry can still be embedded inside it. And Africa is a major destination for that influence. Why? First, because Africa is one of the world's fastest growing security markets. Governments across the continent are under pressure from insurgencies, jihadist violence, separatist rebellions, piracy, organized crime, border instability, and internal political unrest. That creates demand, huge demand. Every state facing a rebellion wants helicopters, armored vehicles, communications gear, intelligence support, and ammunition. Every elite government nervous about protests wants crowd control systems, surveillance technology, and internal security hardware. Every military that sees itself as underfunded but strategically important wants outside partners. And Britain knows that. So British defense firms and British export policy step into that demand with a familiar message. We can help you stabilize your country. We can modernize your forces. We can train your officers. We can equip your army. We can strengthen your borders. We can make you secure. That language sounds responsible, but in reality, it often means selling the tools of war into places where accountability is weak, corruption is high, and violence is already spiraling. That is the first reason British weapons spread through African conflicts, because conflict is a market, and Africa is a growing one. The second reason is history. Britain spent decades building military and political ties across Africa during the colonial period, and those relationships did not simply disappear when independence came. They evolved. Former colonies kept British-style officer training, British legal systems, British diplomatic relationships, British procurement channels, British military culture, British intelligence links. In many cases, even British standard equipment traditions. That means Britain often does not have to enter these countries as a stranger. It arrives as an old power with old access. In some places, British military academies trained generations of officers. In others, security elites still see London as a natural partner. Defense contracts become easier to justify when the relationship already exists. And this is where colonial history stops being a memory and starts becoming infrastructure. Because old empire created the pathways through which modern weapons still move. The third reason is political convenience. Britain likes influence without full responsibility. Direct military intervention is expensive, unpopular, and risky. Occupying foreign territory destroys reputations and drains resources. But arming governments, training their soldiers, supporting their security sectors from a distance, that is much cheaper. It allows Britain to stay relevant without putting massive numbers of British troops on the ground. It lets London claim it is helping regional stability, while local forces do the fighting, the dying, and often the abusing. This is the modern formula. Outsource the violence, keep the contracts, preserve the leverage, avoid the body bags coming home. And for policymakers, that is an attractive deal, especially when Africa is increasingly important in global geopolitics. The Red Sea matters, the Sahel matters, critical minerals matter, shipping routes matter, migration routes matter, counterterrorism matters, competition with Russia and China matters. So when Britain sells arms or deepens military partnerships in Africa, it is not just doing business. It is protecting access and influence in a continent that bigger powers are all trying to shape. That is why these exports are often framed as security cooperation. It sounds cleaner than what it often becomes, because once weapons enter unstable systems, control gets blurry. A rifle sold for counterterrorism can be used against civilians. Armored vehicles sold for national defense can be deployed against protesters. Surveillance tools sold for security can be turned into instruments of repression. Military aid meant to stop insurgents can fuel abuses that create even more insurgency. And that is the contradiction at the center of Britain's role. It says it wants stability, but the weapons can deepen instability. It says it supports human rights, but the buyers often violate them. It says it promotes rules-based order, but the arms trade repeatedly reaches actors operating in deeply broken systems. And none of this happens by accident. Britain has export licensing systems. It has legal language. It has parliamentary oversight mechanisms. It has public-facing criteria that are supposed to prevent arms from reaching destinations where they might be used for repression or serious violations of international law. But in practice, those safeguards often look far weaker than they sound, because the arms trade rarely works like a clear moral line. It works through ambiguity. A government is called a partner, not a risk. A crisis is called a security challenge, not a civil war. An abusive force is called strategically necessary. A weapons package is called defensive. A surveillance system is called stabilizing. The wording changes. The reality on the ground often does not. And once those weapons are delivered, accountability becomes even harder. Did the British government know how the equipment would be used? Did the company verify the end user? Did the buyer follow the original terms? Were the weapons transferred again? Were they captured? Were they redirected to militias, paramilitary units, or security forces with ugly records? By the time those questions get asked, the damage is usually already done. And that is another reason British weapons seem to flood African conflicts, because arms flows are not just about one clean sale from point A to point B. They move through gray zones. They are resold, transferred, integrated into joint systems, used as components inside larger weapons platforms, passed through allies, hidden in bureaucratic language, buried in export categories ordinary people will never read. So the public sees the war, but not the supply chain behind it. And Britain benefits from that invisibility. It can publicly condemn violence in one speech and quietly maintain defense ties in another room. It can denounce repression while approving exports under technical categories few citizens will ever examine. It can present itself as a humanitarian actor while parts of its defense sector profit from the militarization of fragile states. That is not an accident. That is how modern power works. Clean image, messy footprint. And Africa is especially vulnerable to this system, because many governments face real security threats. This part matters. Not every African military buys foreign weapons because it is corrupt. Not every government is inventing enemies. Some states are facing very real insurgencies, massacres, cross-border attacks, and terror campaigns. Their need for equipment is often genuine, but genuine insecurity does not automatically make every arms deal wise. In fact, it can make governments even easier to manipulate. When states are desperate, they buy fast. When elites are scared, they care less about oversight. When war feels urgent, the seller gains leverage. And Britain, like every major arms exporter, understands that fear creates customers. So across parts of Africa, the result is a cycle. Violence rises, governments militarize, foreign suppliers step in, weapons spread, abuses intensify, trust collapses, insurgencies feed off the chaos. Then governments demand even more weapons. That is not stability, that is dependency. And dependency can be incredibly profitable because once a military adopts certain systems, it often needs spare parts, repairs, upgrades, ammunition compatibility, maintenance contracts, retraining, and long-term technical support. So one sale turns into a relationship. One relationship turns into leverage, and leverage turns into influence. That is the deeper story here. British weapons are not just entering African conflicts because somebody signed a contract. They are entering because Britain still wants strategic relevance. British firms want paying markets. African governments want security tools. And the entire system rewards short-term military solutions even when they make long-term crises worse. So when you ask why British weapons are flooding Africa's conflicts, the answer is not just greed, though greed is part of it. It is not just hypocrisy, though hypocrisy is definitely part of it. It is empire's afterlife meeting modern arms capitalism. It is old relationships merged with new insecurity. It is a former colonial power learning how to shape battlefields without formally ruling them. It is influence disguised as partnership, profit disguised as stabilization, and responsibility blurred until nobody can quite be pinned down. But the consequences are not blurred for the people living through them. For civilians in war zones, the source code of the weapon hardly matters when bullets tear through homes. For protesters facing armored crackdowns, the export paperwork means nothing. For families trapped between insurgents and abusive state forces, the distinction between security assistance and conflict escalation can become meaningless very fast. That is the human cost hidden behind defense language. And that is why this issue deserves far more attention than it gets. Because British weapons do not have to dominate headlines to shape outcomes. They only have to keep arriving quietly, legally, strategically, and often with just enough plausible deniability to keep the machine moving. So no, Britain may not look like it is conquering Africa anymore, but through arms, access, and security influence, it can still help decide who fights, who rules, who gets crushed, and which conflicts keep burning longer than they should. And that may be the darkest part of all. The empire faded, the pipeline did not.